Hi everyone, this is Anthony O'Flynn coming to you live from the Sunshine Coast here in Australia. Just taking you through a trip through my neighbourhood here in Cotton Tree. Friday afternoon. It's always more busy on the weekends, regardless if there's holidays on here. It's like a really popular caravan park just to my right, which is pretty famous all around Australia actually, because it's where the river and the ocean meet. It's the front yard of the caravan park is basically the river mouth. So went for my first swim there today actually for the summer. You can really swim all year round obviously here, but I don't. A lot of people do. So today is the day before the Queensland election, the Queensland state election. And it is going to be a very interesting count tomorrow night and a very interesting outcome of this election, because it really is a mandate on the entire pandemic and the COVID crisis, which is, it's affected everybody in one way or another, definitely. Some people in having different experiences with it, which is unique to their own personal journey, but I'm going to be talking about some of the key issues around this election, because it really is a mandate on continued socialism in this country, continued oppression, continued tyranny, continued bad government, abuse of power, abuse of human rights, lack of compassion, and the medical mafia. So where do we go? Well, the current state of play in the Legislative Assembly, which is the lower house, here in Queensland there's no Legislative Council, there's no House of Review, there's no upper house. So effectively that means that the party with the dominant number of seats in the Legislative Assembly will form government. Current state of play is from, as it is of today, 48 Labor, 38 LNP, Katters Australia Party 3, One Nation 1, Greens 1, North Queensland First 1, and 1 independent up in Noosa. So that's the 93. And tomorrow, of course, the election will be played out in, well, basically the central Queensland, northern Queensland will decide the outcome of the election. Not from the division of the electorate's point of view, but basically there's 5 Queenslands when it comes to politics. There's, southeast Queensland, central Queensland, far north Queensland, then western Queensland and the lower part of western Queensland, if that makes sense. So there's basically 5 geographic areas that determine what is occurring, and that was where the Labor Party really failed last federal election, was to acknowledge the overall influence at a national level that North Queensland, Central Queensland would have on the outcome of the federal election, and this really favoured the Liberal Party. So this again is what's going to happen at the state election, and based on those voting patterns at a federal level, you'd assume that there would be a lot more votes going to the LNP as we move through those electorates. Particularly some of them are marginal seats, and the influences of the closing of the borders is going to be huge, because some of those are in Cairns, Townsville, Mackay, seats of Keppel, Mackay, Thuringowa. Really, there's not so many marginal seats in southeast Queensland. South Brisbane's going to be a close one, that could flip, but the election will, for the greater part, as a generalisation, the outcome will be determined in central and northern Queensland, which is interesting because they have been really affected with the tourism with the borders closed. Now, obviously, I'm going to offer a solution at the end of this video as to how to vote tomorrow. It's pretty messy and it's the best of a bad choice really, but it's really my perspective on what can be done short term to really deal with this same agenda, the left wing, the right wing of the same bird, same globalist policy, same socialist agenda. I mean, the federal government at the LNP has basically turned out to be a complete left-wing government. The JobKeeper stimulus has gone over 100 billion. It's pretty mind-boggling really the reversals we're having between the right and the left of an ideological perspective in politics in this country. And it really just shows the dysfunction of government at all levels, and there are no easy solutions in the short term, but I'll at least offer my perspective. But firstly, I'd like to cover a few things to give people some idea of what's really going on. Before COVID, Queensland had the highest unemployment of any state in Australia. We had the lowest business confidence and we had the worst rate of business failure. Currently, Queensland as a state has over $100 billion in debt. I believe that's something around $118 billion of debt. The Labor government even cancelled their budget this year. They're the only government in Australia that won't deliver a budget. Unbelievable. Won't actually admit how bad things really are financially, how much money they've borrowed. Currently there's 6 active cases of COVID in Queensland. And sadly there has been a total of 6 deaths of people who have died with COVID in Queensland. Now, with respect to the families and the friends of the people that died, it's always a tragedy, but the government overreach, the implications of what this has had socially, economically, financially, that the damage will be done going forward into this decade is irreversible. And again, there's nothing really comparable to what's happened in Victoria. But consider this, that there's been 1,000 suicides in Australia, in the whole of Australia, and that statistic was from mid-July. Statistically, it's known, it's a well-known statistic that when unemployment goes up, suicides will go up. So therefore, when a government is choosing to sacrifice an economy for the protection of people who could potentially have died, well, that's a choice that will mean definitively that there will be people who will die from suicide. Definitely. It's been proven time and time again, not just in Australia, it's a universal indication. Continuing on, the ALP also voted against child sex offender register for Queensland. Who are you protecting, Anastasia Palaszczuk? Why would you vote against something like that? And this whole farce of this COVID restrictions that are supposed to be something to do with health, how do you explain that there was 37,000 people at Suncorp Stadium last month for a sporting event? It's completely ridiculous. What's even more ridiculous is the politicisation of this issue with the borders. Just turning around, it's a bit noisy down there. And today we've seen that the borders are open into New South Wales, but not Sydney and the greater Sydney area. Which means basically people can visit family and friends from Sydney in places like Byron and then return back to Queensland, and all those people are connecting and meeting up, and then they go back to their own places. It's actually beyond belief that someone like Jeanette Young, who is a unelected bureaucrat that's getting paid over $600,000 a year, making those decisions, playing with people's lives, playing with people's incomes, jobs, businesses, it's completely unelected. And we need to hold the government accountable this tomorrow and put Labor last. It's the only solution is to vote Anastasia Palaszczuk out of government, because a continuing of her as Premier is a mandate for authoritarianism, government overreach, alarmism, destruction of people's lives, jobs, prosperity, well-being, emotional health, mental health. And Queensland's such a fantastic place. I've lived here for over 17 years now. I've never moved to another state at this stage. It's a great place. So, there's an African proverb: the sheep will spend its entire life fearing the wolf, only to be eaten by the shepherd. And that is a powerful metaphor for we stand at the crossroads at this state election here in Queensland, because it's time to, this is the time, we only get this time once every 4 years to give the government a no to their job interview, which is tomorrow. The application for a job is tomorrow, and the best solution is to vote Labor last. So does that mean, Anthony, that the solution is the LNP? Absolutely not. Look at Scotty from marketing's failed role as leader of this nation, and the debacle that he has in his complete inaction and lack of leadership and lack of a way forward on so many different levels as a leader. Deb Frecklington, the leader of the LNP, even said that IMOP, a political party here, independent party, shouldn't even be on the ballot paper. That indicates the kind of calibre of politician and the views that these people who are running for office, and she's obviously already a parliamentarian, have. These people need to be educated in what the democratic process is that they don't get to decide who should be on the ballot paper. That's a matter for the people. And that's what democracy is. It's what people vote for, what they decide. They vote for the politicians. The politicians like her, leaders of political parties, whoever they are, they don't decide who's on the ballot paper or not. That's a matter of free will and free choice. And this lack of political integrity and really understanding of what the democratic system is just shows, is very revealing of her attitudes towards the minor parties that may have alternative views to her. But that's what a free country is about, that we are free to have different opinions, different attitudes. So this issue of who to vote tomorrow, well, we're coming to a maturing process at the collective here in Australia, and one of the real implications of the COVID crisis this year is the losing of our innocence. The whole trust we have in the government, in the mainstream media, in our institutions is failing radically. And many people are really asking, well, is the solution just to vote out the government and vote in the LNP? Of course it's not, because the agenda is the same, because they're just puppets. They're just being told what they to do by various transnational organisations, various other institutes, all these kinds of things. It's one big club. Even Kevin Rudd has been tied to Jeffrey Epstein recently, and the organisation that he's a chairman of actually received $650,000 US donation from Jeffrey Epstein. They all know each other. Think about it, that's nearly $1 million Australian dollars. And yet, no one seems to question that. Where does that money come from? What's it for? Why is that donation being made? And what's the relationship between Kevin Rudd and Jeffrey Epstein, or was? It's one big club. They all know each other. It's one big agenda. And therefore, the way I see it, with the standing of the Legislative Assembly in Queensland and the independents, they mean well and they perhaps have a lot of integrity, but look at the current events that we've seen in Melbourne, where the independents voted for the continuation of the policies that were implemented by dictator Dan. It's just absolutely unbelievable, because for so long many people have touted the independents as a solution to break two-party stranglehold on the parliamentary system here in Australia. And I agree, it's still a short-term possibility, but in my view, what really needs to emerge is a genuine third party to create a hung parliament. Now, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm optimistic, or I'm hoping at least, that Anastasia will get voted out. I think it's going to be close, and it really will. It'll even come down to Katter's Australian Party is going to be very influential on what happens. But I really feel that that emergence of that one Australia-wide party, the best option for that at this point, it's the really best of a bad choice, and to use as a battering ram, is One Nation. Now, I don't support One Nation, but it's more that I oppose both the Liberal and the Labor parties, and it might come as a shock to hear that, but it's simply a strategy to stop this continuation of this illusion of choice, this illusion of free will. I mean, it's just a fantasy that people think that anything's going to change by voting for LNP tomorrow. And if it means that if enough seats can be won, particularly in central and northern Queensland, by One Nation, then they can create a hung parliament, which basically gives them a much greater influence over the parliamentary process. Now, it's not looking really that great, even that choice, because after all these years of this, getting the message out there and all the branding that One Nation have had, and they've had a lot of bad publicity, but really this year has been a voice of sanity with Pauline Hanson standing up for Australians and Australian values, one of the few politicians to do that. And before you criticise her, tell me one other politician by name. There are actually a couple you could say have been standing up for freedom, for democracy, for all the values that we consider to be Australian, by name. Who can you actually name? What about your federal elected parliamentarian? Do you even know who that is? And what have they been saying in the media about the policies that have been implemented by the state governments? This dividing of Australia into borders, it's un-Australian, it's unconstitutional, and it's part of the whole socialist agenda to make different zones, to divide people. And it amazes me, out of all the people, what's been going on in Victoria, there's 25 million people approximately in Australia. The other, whatever it is, 19 or 18 million people, however many it is, who are not Victorians, how little there has been outrage among the rest of Australians. And that's exactly the strategy that these socialists, that these globalists are trying to implement, is divide and conquer. It's a strategy that's worked for thousands of years in terms of religion, nations, gender, political beliefs, all these things. It doesn't really make any difference. All they ever try to do is divide us, and in that way we are always conquered. Now, it is likely that particularly the people in central Queensland, North Queensland may vote One Nation tomorrow, but it will send a message if you vote One Nation first, even if your candidate doesn't win, that it's time for a third party in Australia. And as I've said before, I do believe that a third party will emerge beyond One Nation. I do think there'll be a new party that will come together. If you're voting in living in the seat of Nicklin, then I recommend voting one for Alona Lan from the IMOP party. She's got candidates in many of the different seats and is very well-meaning, has a lot of integrity, really has a lot of good values. But to announce you're running for a seat 1 or 2 months before the election, you just don't have the momentum or the groundswell of support to really get over the line to get this two-party, the percentage of vote is so insignificant for most of the independents. So if you are living in Nicklin, then she's got a great chance, because if you look at the history, it's currently held by LNP, but going back numerous elections, it's always been an independent. So your vote really counts if you're on the Sunshine Coast and you're living in Nicklin. And of course, there's other IMOP candidates running in many of the seats throughout Queensland. So really, it's time that the Australian people come of age and develop a more mature attitude to what's really happening on the political landscape, and start to get engaged in the political process and realise that democracy isn't just going to happen for our good anymore, that we have to start to become mobilised and motivated to influence the political process, to get our values represented in government, because it's just not occurring at the moment. And really can really see that 2020 has been a real wake-up call for many people. And it really does concern me where we're going to go if the Labor Party get voted back in the next 4 years. And people say they don't really care about politics. Well, you are going to care about politics in this decade, because when you are unemployed, when you've lost your house, when you've lost your job, when you're not be able to pay off your car repayments, your credit card payments, when you can't go out of your house, when you can't do all the things that you've taken for granted that's happened in 2020, then you're going to get engaged in the political process. And this is definitely going to continue. I mean, we've just seen here that in Paris has gone back into lockdown, This thing is not over yet, and it's not going to be over for a long time. And the next thing that's coming, of course, is the mandatory vaccination, which won't be mandatory, but the coercion to have that shot will be significant. So if you're one of these apathetic people, she'll be right, mate, then you're going to have a real cold shower this decade, because this is not going to turn around in this election cycle. It's not even going to turn around in the next election cycle. It looks like we're going to have a federal election even late next year, and it's going to go on and on until we as a people come together, unite with one voice to get rid of this tyranny, of this oppression, of this globalist socialist agenda that is eroding and destroying the Australian way of life. And tomorrow, God help us if we vote back in the Labor Party, because we're actually endorsing the mandate of Anastasia Palaszczuk. So you should really think very carefully who you vote for tomorrow, whoever it is, because people think that what happened in Victoria won't happen in Queensland. What would make you think that? Last year, if I had made a video saying, oh, next year there's going to be all these restrictions, you won't be able to go visit your friends, your family in New South Wales, you won't be able to do this and that, you won't be able to do all these things that we've taken for granted, which is a reflection of our way of life, our values here in Australia, you would have laughed at me. And yet look what's going on in Victoria now. And that's part of Australia, in case you've forgotten. So tomorrow is a big day. I'll be watching very carefully to see the outcome of this election. God help the souls of the people that are enforcing this tyranny on the people of Australia and around the world, because the fate that awaits them, you wouldn't wish that upon anybody. But anyway, thanks for watching. Paradigm Shift's coming up, Summit's coming up. It's 2 weeks tomorrow. I shouldn't even be making this video. I should be working hard getting things ready. But thanks for watching. We live in epic times.